Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. This is our presentation for our international business class. We are going to be presenting on our country, China. We're going to be presenting our business proposal where we're going to introduce three products that we want to introduce into the China marketplace. In addition to that, we're going to talk a little bit about the business culture of the organization of China, and we're going to go into FTAs, FDIs, and a little bit about the cultural considerations when doing business in China. Okay, so first of all, we want to start off by looking at the Hofstede dimensions. Here we see some of the differences between China and the United States. Now, the ones that we want to really focus on are the ones where we have a bigger discrepancy or disparity between the two. For example, the individualism is one that we're definitely going to need to take into consideration. The individualism for China is very low, which falls under collectivism. China is very big on collectivism, and that makes that makes the United States much more focused on individualism. The second one is the long-term orientation. As you can see in this example, China in this example has a much higher score here. So that means that they take a more pragmatic approach when doing business. When it comes to the United States, they fall more under the low dimension. So, they prefer more of the time-honored traditions and norms. And finally, the third one that we want to talk about that we're going to take into consideration when doing business in China is also the indulgence. And this one is either on the indulgence or the restraints. Okay, China being low on the indulgence versus restraint, that means that they prefer more of the restraint, where the United States falls higher, and they're much more focused on indulgence when it comes to having fun and really satisfying any needs when it comes to leisure. Okay, so those are the three dimensions that we want to take into consideration. So let's go ahead and go on to the next slide, and we'll see some of the items that we're going to have to really focus on, some of the tactics, negotiation tactics that we're going to need to focus on based on the previous Hofstede dimensions that we just saw. The first one is patience. Okay, so Chinese business people are much more willing to take their time in negotiation, followed by avoid giving negative feedback in public, and finally suppressing feelings and emotion that may endanger harmony. Okay, so these items I think fall under the much broader category of patience and something that we have to take into consideration. Relationships. These time-consuming negotiations will hopefully lead to long-term relationships. They are very big on long-term relations and establishing those relationships. Behave in a modest way. I don't think we want to go in and be the aggressive one and be the more superior one. We want to have a modest approach to whatever we do. And finally, in that section under relationship, avoid talking too much about yourself. Remember, like we talked about, it's not so much about the individualism, it's much more about the collectivism in China. Okay, and finally, the third section is credibility. Avoid making jokes when engaged in a formal session. Instead, be professional. Sometimes we tend to not be unprofessional, but be throw in jokes. So I think we want to stay clear of that in this presentation. And finally, only express negativity about the world during informal meetings. So we want to stay clear again of any negativity in any presentations that we have with our China group. And finally, believing that small lies and misinterpretations are part of the business. Okay, so those are three sections of the negotiation tactics, and in our next section we'll see that the communication culture is also going to be very critical in this, in presenting in China. China has a high context culture, which means that, China compared to the United States are on the opposite ends of this spectrum. Okay, messages are read, and almost much of, you got to read between the lines. Okay, this is much more, instead of like saying no, you got to say, instead of them saying no, I should say, or they say no in a much more subtle way, I guess you can say. A strong sense of message being implied versus the no. So that's a clear example of a high context culture in China. The feedback, the recipient is expected to read between the lines, just a little bit more of what I talked about in the first section. Need to take ownership of the shortcomings without being told directly, because we got to really recognize when we have shortcomings. Nobody's going to be pointing them out to us. Disagreement culture typically avoids confrontation. Open confrontation is inappropriate. Okay. And finally, negatively impacts relationships. So any confrontation is really going to take a hit on our relationship. So again, we want to be professional. We don't want to criticize. And finally, scheduling culture. Another aspect to take into consideration is that China is very flexible and adaptable, and that is very important in their society. And expect interruptions. Interruptions are going to come up, and it's expected. So let's not worry about those interruptions that come up. So again, those are just some items when it comes to the communication culture, as well as the Hofstede dimensions that we should be aware of. Okay, so let's go ahead and go into the political climate now.
Some macroeconomic factors that would influence the Chinese market and business stability are, for example, the China and United States tariff war, potential change in leadership of Germany, and China censorship laws. China and the US have an ongoing tariff war. Germany's leader, Angela Merkel, has a pragmatic relationship with China. Recent losses in elections in Germany of his party could potentially shift the economic relationships between Germany and China. A potentially new leadership and tariff war could make a breakpoint for the Europe and China doing business in the next 5 years. This, of course, for our business means the new entry of competitors in our market. Next. New censorship laws could undermine anonymity in the web in China. These laws also intend to protect film industry in China. For now, the tariff war has not touched American film industry, but the escalating climate between US and China could potentially attack this industry. For our business, it means a decreasing confidence in one of the major channels of distribution. And of course, the escalating tariff war would increase our costs. Next.
FDI trade restrictions. Some of the trade restrictions in China is that the businesses, especially foreign companies, are managed by local authorities. Several market sectors are closed to FDI opportunities. State companies, national flagships, and favored corporations are sheltered from license barriers, standard regulations, and certain authoritative enforcement agencies that non-affiliated companies would typically be subjected to. Other challenges include poor intellectual property rights enforcement, forced technology transfer, and a systematic lack of rule of law. FDI and trade incentives. The promotion of FDI is part of a focus moving forward for China to engage credibly with the outside world and aims at creating a better business environment and a structure for distribution of investments. Each region in China has a provincial level agency that promotes FDI through the local department. Foreign investors receive corporate tax advantages. China is an attractive country to produce in because of it's a base for low cost production labor. Important free trade agreements regarding China. The United States and China are actually the two biggest economies in the world. Together, they represent approximately 30% of the global economy. China is the country that exports the most goods around the globe. The United States is the biggest importer in the world. The China-US trading arrangement has become one of the fastest growing bilateral trade relations in the world. Currently, China and the United States do not have a free trade agreement. Mainland China has bilateral trade agreements with the countries listed below.
So there are also a few graphs here that we want to take a look at, just to look at the past 5 years for the current economic conditions in China. This one here is a GNI per capita. So keep in mind, this does not account for foreigners. This would be the pure, the pure Chinese economy for the individual households. And so this graph shows in the last 5 years, they've steadily increased about 1,000 per person. In the last 5 years, they've grown 37%, which is a really good indicator for the economy, especially for the consumers, that they, of course, will have more money in their pockets on the average Chinese member. This here is a GDP growth annual percentage. And so this shows how much each year they've grown in a form of percentage. This graph is actually a little, so it's done by the 10th percentage point. And so it looks like it fluctuates a whole lot more than it does. But if we look at the data, it has actually only fluctuated 1.1% growth in the last 5 years. And so that's a really good indicator that the growth is very consistent. It's been, of course, right around the 7% mark the last 5 years. As well, the inflation for the consumer prices annual percentage is something that is also important, because a high inflation, of course, will be a good indicator that the market is probably not a market that you want to be venturing into. But China has had low rates for the past 5 years, and they also have been very consistent. You see the past 5 years, they have not inflated more than 2.6% in a year. And of course, that low inflation is great for customers. This is the lending interest rate. And so overall, this also is very consistent and steady. The best thing about this rate is that the last 3 years, it has dropped to what it was 5 years ago. We can see in 2013, they had a 6% lending rate, and they steadily declined now down to like a 4.4%. And so just kind of comparative, the Americas rate right now is 3%. So it's pretty similar, but of course, 5 years ago was twice as much as what we had in America. And that's just a good comparison to kind of show where it lies compared to other countries. And of course, some countries have a very bad interest rate. I think Brazil was about 26% for interest rate. So China is still a good rate, but it is more than what it would be here in America. In this last graph, it shows the exchange rate. And this is probably, and this of course is compared to the US dollar. This is probably the biggest red flag out of these graphs. So the fluctuation rate, it's ranged between 0.165 and 0.145 cents to the dollar the past 5 years. And so while it seems like a very small fluctuation rate, when you compare it to like the large scale of things, like 10,000 US dollars compared to 0.165 yuan would be a whole lot more than compared to 0.145. And so because it's marked in the in the cents margin, any small margin would lead to a big margin of error, and be very hard to pinpoint certain prices for any kind of currency exchange.
Okay, so our first product recommendation is baby formula. An incident with laced baby formula back in 2008 shattered people's confidence in Chinese-made infant formula. This deep distrust remains in spite of the government's efforts to make infant formula among the most heavily regulated foods in China. The demand for imported baby formula is high because Chinese parents have typically purchased imported baby formula from foreign manufacturers. And analysts predict that in the next few years, the Chinese FDA's cut of import baby formula will be positive for overseas companies. Importing baby formula into China can be challenging. Since Chinese consumers trust foreign-made baby formula more, the additional endorsement of mothers who use it on a daily basis could help ensure Chinese consumers that the product is the best for their baby. One potential cultural challenge we may face is that the Chinese government has recently enacted a number of milk deal initiatives to develop domestic brands. With the current economic conditions of the US trade wars, the Chinese consumer may turn their focus on buying domestically versus imported products out of loyalty. This cultural loyalty to one's own country can potentially negatively affect any sales of foreign baby formula products. So our second recommendation is a smart air fryer. This product is the healthy alternative to a deep fryer, which is as good or better results in the quality and taste of food. The air fryer has become quite popular in the United States in recent years. Let's face it, everyone likes fried food, even though we know it's not healthy. The Chinese culture has a higher health awareness than many countries, and perhaps one cultural speed bump would be the negativity that comes from the word fryer. But the Chinese consumer market is beginning to become increasingly susceptible to the small kitchen appliance products and markets. Because there are a few companies selling this product, we are suggesting a smart air fryer that can be controlled with an app from a smartphone. The smartphone app would allow users to control the appliance remotely, which would give it a temporary sustainable advantage from the air fryers that do not have this functionality. So our last product recommendation is the Home Energy Tracker. This product can tell users how much energy they are using in their home and where, which can help cut down cost and energy consumption. It seems as though energy use in China, like in the US, has increased over the years, and it seems to be happening regardless of location, be it urban or rural. There seems to be many brands selling this kind of product, but the big name brands are Sense and Curb. And their products are typically priced around $300 to $400 US. Because this product isn't necessarily rare, I believe that if we priced our product lower than competitors, we'll probably win sales. There are a few reasons for this. The first being that the Chinese tend to practice more restraint with their money. So they will be more likely to practice restraint on their purchase until they find the best deal. In addition to this, they are sensible people who look to the future and are likely to consider a product's practicality. Because these products are not very popular in China currently, I believe we will be serving an underserved market. We just need to focus our marketing in a way that will be beneficial based off of the cultural values mentioned above. By focusing on the potential money-saving aspect of using such a product and the potential effect on the environment if they don't use this product, we should be able to get their attention.